right, welcome to my children's ministry friends. I spent a long time in children's ministry. You're my people, so I am really glad that you're here today. So I wanted to start with a story. Last year, this mom from my church, she sat at my kitchen table. We were talking about something and her eyes were just like sparkling with tears. And I had just told her about this short parent class that I began teaching over 15 years ago at my church. And she nodded and she's like, I know, I was there. And I felt a little sheepish for describing this class that she'd actually been to. But then that feeling faded as she talked about her three daughters, all who are in their 20s now, all who changed profoundly because of what she learned in that class. So, like tears sliding down her cheeks, just that quiet tear. And she said, my kids would not be who they are right now without it. And she leaned in. She said, when you ask God every single night to bless your kids, don't be surprised when he does. Now, one of her daughters just had her first child. Another one of her daughters just got married. They're all very active in the church. And I just love that. So God nudged me to start teaching families simple ways to disciple their kids, about 15, 16 years ago. And because I obeyed, very feebly and imperfectly, God is now impacting another generation, which I think is pretty cool. Family discipleship can seem like a big mystery for us as church leaders. I know it for sure was for me for the first few years of my ministry, and sometimes it still is. So some families in your church find discipleship so easy. Some people are like, well, I just live and breathe Jesus. But honestly, most families in your church are probably not really talking about Jesus with their kids ever. Now, you want the families in your church to thrive in their faith. But if you've experienced any of the same things as me, your efforts might seem a little fruitless. So raise your hand or put it in the comments if you've ever passed out take-home sheets only for them to get muddy on the minivan floor, or maybe even not make it out the door of your classroom. So let me know in the comments or just raise your hand. That seems like a pretty common thing, right? Okay, so found in the trash. Yep, absolutely. Right? Okay, so raise your hand again if you've ever spent a week or so planning and prepping this amazing take-home family kit for Christmas or for Easter, only to discover that they didn't use it, or maybe they used it for like 2 days and then they just forgot about it. So if you've ever spent a lot of time prepping a take-home thing and then they didn't use it, let me know in the comments. Or, oh yeah, Jen's got her hand up. Awesome. Okay, raise your hand again if you've ever organized. Yeah, you never know who uses the bags for sure. So raise your hand if you've ever organized a parent seminar, inviting every family from your church, and then about like 10% of them actually come, and they're the ones who could teach the seminar probably. So if you've ever done that, let me know again. Yep, true again. Yeah, okay, one more. So raise your hand if you've started sending out a weekly email to parents, hoping that the ones who aren't really doing anything at home will be inspired to start. But if you're using some sort of email service provider where you can see the open rates, you see it drop after a few weeks, and then it's just like the couple keener parents opening those emails every time yet again. So you may not have done that, but I definitely did that. Yeah, okay, it's not just me. So why is this happening? This is the mystery we're setting out to solve today. It's really frustrating, right? You wouldn't be here if you didn't believe that parents and grandparents have a role in discipling their kids, but it kind of seems like pushing this boulder up a hill to get them to do anything about it. But the answer isn't to send home more resources to gather, crumbs in the minivan, but to take one step backward and show parents that they are able to do this. So in short, equipping families is more about message than method. Okay, so this is my family. I was in the same position for several years. I was the children's ministry director at my church for over 10 years. And over that time, I ran my fair share of Christian parenting classes. I sent out all the emails. I handed out all the resources. And since 2018, I've been running an online family membership ministry called Little Shoots Deep Roots. Sorry, I was like blank there for a second on my own name. And so the purpose of Little Shoots Deep Roots, as you've probably discovered, is designed to help parents disciple your kids without having to know it all or do it all. And my husband and I have 3 sons whom I'm currently homeschooling, and they are 10, 12, and 15. And I also have 5 books for Christian families. So 5 for the kids. And then I have one more that's releasing in 2 weeks called Little Habits, Big Faith, How Simple Practices Help Your Family Grow in Jesus. So I'm actually going to share some of the stuff from the book with you today. As I listened to my readers, both online and via these conversations over Zoom and with friends, I discovered something. The cry of the Christian parent's heart is really for their kids to know God's love and to help their kids discover authentic and meaningful faith, but they feel a little bit stuck. But we as Christian leaders tend to approach faith formation struggles of Christian parents like it's a method problem, assuming that if we give parents the right resources, they'll disciple their kids effectively. And here's the problem. Christian parents want to do this, but they get bogged down by the messages they're telling themselves every day. Like almost everything else in life, a lot of it starts in the head. So they're saying things like, my kids won't listen, or some variation on that. Or I don't have enough time. I can't be consistent. I don't have enough knowledge. I'm not a good enough Christian to teach someone else. So do you hear the messages that Christian parents are telling themselves? We're telling ourselves. If you're a parent, I should have asked you that too. But giving resources only answers one of those deep questions, and in fact has caused a lot of overwhelm and resource paralysis among parents. They're feeling bogged down, they're feeling guilty, they feel like discipling their kids is another item on a never-ending to-do list. Their kids are constantly distracted during prayer or have a bad attitude when they read the Bible, so they either give up or they keep plugging along just enough to keep the guilt at bay. And it's all because we've got all these bad messages that we're telling ourselves. I have been on both sides of the conversation, both as a ministry leader and as a mom who spent a lot of time worrying that I wasn't doing enough for my kids. Well, I'm on a mission to help Christian parents know they can confidently disciple their kids without having to know it all or do it all. Our great God calls us into a life of freedom. So I believe if we want to truly help parents, we can't just give them the resources, because equipping families is more about message than method. We have to address the lies that parents are believing. Remember those 3 big things that Christian parents are struggling with? And I've asked this question over and over again. What is your biggest struggle? And it almost always comes down to one of these 3 things. But we're going to break each of them down and we're going to expose the lies that they're believing. And then I'm going to give you 3 truths that you can share just in conversation with people as you're having conversations in the hallway, as they're picking up their kids, as you're talking about these things on the phone. 3 truths that you can use to counteract those lies. Because I promise you, once they internalize the message, they'll find the method that works for their unique family. So the reason number 1 that parents give me, what's your biggest struggle? They say, my kids won't sit still and listen, or some variation of this, like they won't sit still, they're not interested. So the underlying lie there, and you can probably feel free to type in if you see some other underlying lies that come with this reason, feel free to put them in there. I would label the underlying lie here as my kids have to pay attention at every moment or I'm a failure. Some version of that. That's the lie that they're believing. My kids have to pay attention or I'm a failure. If you have another suggestion as to what the lie is that they're maybe believing, feel free to put that in the chat too. So here's what happened in my family. I would open a storybook Bible when my kids were little, and my kids that had been sitting quietly and listening to a bedtime book, they suddenly couldn't sit still and they needed to do backflips on their bed. Or you might find that you pull out the Bible at the table and suddenly your teenager is glued to their phone or has the desperate need to go to the bathroom or get a bowl of fruit, which has happened in my family. It's like you couldn't wait for 5 minutes. But here's the actual problem. And it's not really our kids that are the problem. It's the adults. We believe that if they're not sitting still and listening quietly, they're not paying attention or not learning. Our teachers taught us that sitting still was the same thing as paying attention, right? How many times have you heard the phrase, sit still and pay attention? That value is really ingrained in us from a very early age. But if our kids equate sitting still with being bored, as a lot of kids do, how can they enjoy something like family devotions if we're asking them to sit still and listen? Then it becomes a fight and everyone gets frustrated and it becomes easier to not do it at all. Trying to get our kids to sit still and pay attention, especially in a home environment, can actually block our efforts to share Jesus with our kids. Because we think that if they're not sitting still and listening quietly, they're not paying attention or learning, or we think that reflects like badly on us, like we're failing. But when our kids stop listening, it actually kind of isn't them that's the problem. It is us. They're not acting out because they don't care. They're probably acting out because we're boring. And even if they were sitting still and quietly listening, sitting still and listening quietly doesn't even equal engaged learning for a lot of kids. As you've probably noticed in your Sunday school classes, the quiet kids are just as likely to be zoned out as to be engaged. And sometimes the most engaged child is the one who's running around while you talk. So, telling our kids to just sit still and listen is a great way to push them away from God and maybe even from us. Because if we're constantly harping on that, sit still, pay attention, listen, then we're not able to build that relationship with them as well. Because sharing Jesus with our own children at home isn't about getting as much info into them as possible, as much theological information, as many Bible stories, while they sit quietly and drink in our wisdom, although that sounds lovely. Discipleship is about relationships. When parents learn to consider their child's interests, allow them to wiggle and interrupt, or let them create art or even play while they're reading or praying, the family is building a sense of truth and family warmth. And that family warmth has been shown to be critical for faith transmission. So here's the truth message that you can give parents. If you hear them say something like, well, my kids won't sit still and listen, the truth that you can tell them is that you don't need to get them to sit still. What you need is to get them engaged. And there is a difference. So in order to get them engaged, I actually have a resource that I can give you. And it's called When I Read the Bible, I Can. And it's this poster that you can print off, you can share with your families. So if they need some ideas to help their kids get engaged in Bible study, to flip the script of thinking that all movement is misbehavior, you can try this resource. The second reason that parents give me as to why they can't do this is I don't have time to do this. I'm too busy. I am bad at being consistent. But mostly it's just, I don't have enough time. And so the underlying lie there is that it takes time that I don't have. Well, parents often feel as if talking to their kids about faith or teaching the Bible to them is just another item to add to their already overflowing to-do list. You've probably heard the analogy of the priorities of our day being like a jar of rocks and pebbles and sand. And in order to get everything into the jar, we put the big rocks in first, representing the high priority tasks. And then we add the smaller rocks and the sand, which are the low priority tasks. Well, faith is supposed to be one of those big rocks, right? Something we need to try really hard to fit in. Well, here's what happens. Parents are already hustling every morning. And then you just mentioned that maybe they could try reading the Bible and praying with their kids before they start school. So mom tries to fit it in. She's trying to be that good Christian mom, but there's dishes and cleaning and driving and school. What could she possibly take out? Maybe she could just wake up earlier or load the dishwasher later. It feels so complicated. So honestly, after a couple days, it's easier to just let it slide. And dad, well, he's a busy guy with work and coaching the kids' soccer team and driving his teens to events. When we talk about family discipleship this way, as if family discipleship is a big rock that parents have to get into their day, it will feel like they have to actively take something out in order to fit God in. And I do see this a lot in kidmin groups. Well, they just need to stop doing sports or they need to stop doing all these other things. But I have a mind shift here. So what if instead of God and faith being one of those rocks, this compartmentalized item to check off on a to-do list, what if he's actually the sand? So sure, the sand is the part that you pour in last, in the actual jar. But this is our metaphor. We can change it. It doesn't have to represent the low priority tasks. The sand fits in all the cracks and it surrounds and connects every rock. Acts 17:28 says, in him we live and move and have our being. And Colossians 1:17 says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. You've seen this verse before, I am sure. Deuteronomy 6:5-9 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. These families who first heard these words, they were busy, and nothing about their context made this kind of consistency easy. The Israelites were refugees. They were fleeing from generations of enslavement. They lived in a nomadic tent city in the desert, which I can guarantee you was a lot of work. If you've ever gone camping, it's a lot of work. In fact, a couple of years ago, my husband said, why do we camp? It's just so much work. The women spent their days cooking and cleaning and caring for their children and probably dumping sand out of every sandal. And the men spent their days shepherding in the wilderness and caring for the tabernacle and learning to be warriors. God didn't ask the Israelites to add a bunch of stuff to their lives. These parents were just to talk about God and his commandments whenever they were with their kids, whatever they were doing, baking bread, birthing lambs, trekking to the next campsite. Because faith isn't a big rock. It's the sand that holds everything together. And when we help parents approach their child's faith as something that glues their day together and slips into every nook and cranny of their lives, suddenly it becomes very different from an item on their to-do list. We're asking them to invite God into what they're already doing, driving kids to school, taking kids to soccer, bathing toddlers, tucking kids into bed, rather than adding another thing to their schedule. So the lie that parents are telling you that they're believing is that I don't have time. When you hear that, here's what I want you to say. Small, intentional faith moments are enough. And I also have a resource. So this is the second link. It's called the Start Little Guide, and you can print it off. You can email it, however you want to disperse it to the people in your church. I might ask you not to post it publicly online, but you can put it in a private Facebook group or, however, within church ways that you communicate with parents. But it's the Start Little Guide, and it's really to help parents pare back their expectations and find something simple and sustainable they can actually do with their kids. And so the one in the picture here is mostly green. I have a new one that has some fun oranges and stuff in it. So that's what you'll see when you actually download it, but the content is the same. So that is the second link that I have there. It says christythomas.ck.page.3c, blah, blah, blah. So the second link there, you can sign up for that one. And the third major problem that parents tell me, here's why I can't disciple my kids, is because I don't know enough to disciple my kids. Or they might say, my own relationship with God isn't good enough. Or I've often heard, I'm not a good enough Christian to teach someone else. So there are lots of underlying lies here. The things that they're believing are like, my weakness is bigger than God's strength, or I have to know it all before I can share anything with my kids. Or maybe they're believing I have to be a super Christian in order to teach my own children. Parents are always looking around to see what others are doing. That's what we're doing online. That's what we're doing with our friends. We're often comparing our efforts to other families, whether for good or for bad. There's that family in my church who reads the Bible after dinner every day, and the homeschool mom down the road whose kids do their own Bible studies every morning with a smile, and my child's Sunday school teacher who has all the answers, and my spouse who just knows more about the Bible. It can seem to parents that you, as the children's leader, are more qualified to lead their kids in faith than they are. And they may not be completely wrong, right? Chances are you've pored over your curriculum, you've prayed over it, you've prepared an amazing lesson. Parents don't have time for that. Not only that, but maybe their own faith was largely formed by the church, so they aren't sure they're doing enough with their kids or doing the right stuff. Or maybe they grew up with faith being a very personal, private thing. This is what happened in my family. We just didn't really talk about it. So it feels weird to talk about God in normal family conversation. Or maybe they're new Christians. Having their kids learn from trained people who are prepared and obviously know more can certainly feel safer. And I'm not saying that we stop doing that. I'm just saying, here's the truth, is that God doesn't expect us to know enough because he wants us to rely on him. So having an awesome children's ministry program is such a gift. But we also want parents to know that you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have this fantastically researched curriculum. Because discipling our kids, or really discipling anyone else, is not a job we're supposed to handle on our own in our own power. In one of my very favorite verses in the book of Acts, Peter and John have been brought in front of the religious leaders to be questioned about this healing they've done. And Acts 4:13 says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. What changed these guys from just these normal dudes into powerful Christians who helped build the early church? It wasn't more education. It was Jesus. Spending time with Jesus and being filled with the Holy Spirit was enough to turn them into powerhouses. And the same is true for the parents in your church. They don't need to have attended Christian school or read the whole Bible or obtained a seminary degree to be qualified. Those things are all great, but you don't need them. Just like with the early disciples, it's not what you know, but who you know that matters. So as parents, we don't need a lot. We just need to bring our little to God and leave the results up to him. So let's do some math here. I have a science degree, so every once in a while I like to use graphs. Let's imagine that parents decide to wait for someone else better qualified to take charge. So they spend zero time talking about God or reading the Bible with their kid for the first 10 years. This graph is what happens when you wait for someone else to do it, represented by the blue line at the bottom, the big fat lot of nothing. Now let's imagine that they start at age 1 with a 30-second faith routine. That's doable, right? No matter how ill-equipped a parent feels, they can pray the Lord's Prayer for 30 seconds or read a Bible verse out loud as they tuck their child in. Then let's imagine that each year, this parent gets a little more confident. So every year they're adding 30 seconds per day. So by age 2, they're reading the Bible or praying with their child or listening to worship for a total of 1 minute per day. And by age 10, they're doing 5 minutes per day. The green line represents how much time they're spending each day with their child, actively discipling them. By the time their child is 10 years old, parents are spending nearly 2,000 minutes per year in intentional conversations and prayer with their child. Now, the gray line is the total amount of minutes they've spent sharing Jesus with their kids really intentionally when the kids are listening and the conversations are happening and the prayer is real. And you can see that it goes up faster and faster as the time goes. In fact, by age 10, they've spent 167 hours actively reading the Bible, praying, talking about God with their kids. Again, in a way that their kids are actually understanding, in short snippets where they're paying attention. Now, if Jesus can take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and use it to feed thousands, you tell me he can't take 167 hours and do something amazing in that child's heart. Jesus specializes in taking our little and turning it into a lot. We don't need a lot when we bring our little to God. So when you hear parents say things like, I don't know enough to disciple my kids, or my own relationship with God isn't good enough, or I'm not a good enough Christian to teach someone else, here's a truth message that you can give them. And you can feel free to modify this, but if you just want something that's kind of catchy, you can use this. Jesus can take your little and turn it into a lot. Or it's not about who you know, it's not about what you know. It's about who you know. Man, I really messed that one up. Jesus can take your little and turn it into a lot because it's not about who you know. I still can't say it because it's not about what you know. It's about who you know. There we go. Invite parents to seek God for themselves and ask God for insight into discipling their kids. God will give them the perfect plan for their family. Not only a plan, but he's going to inspire them in the moment too, with those moment by moment, teachable moments. So here's a resource that you can give parents. It's something I've created called the growth cycle. So the growth cycle gives parents a tangible, sustainable, super practical system that helps them create these realistic, attainable habits of family discipleship, enabling them to tap into the power of starting small with simple habits that grow into reflexes and rhythms of faith over time. Through the clear and flexible steps of the growth cycle, parents learn to listen for the Holy Spirit's prompting. They distill habits down into their smallest possible form and then grow them into flourishing habits of faith. So I kind of allude to the growth cycle in that free start little graphic or that download that I've given you. But if you want to learn how to use this growth cycle method, you can offer your church families 2 different things. So the first is, I mentioned that I have a book coming up. Wow, that picture is really grainy. It's called Little Habits, Big Faith, How Simple Family Practices Help Your Family Grow in Jesus. And like I said, what I told you today is lifted out of the book. Obviously, the book is a lot longer than what I have told you today. But if you're like, man, I really want my parents to read this, then you can offer them this book. So it teaches your families exactly what we just talked about. It walks them through starting and continuing these life-giving family discipleship habits in baby steps, helping them come up with their first faith habit, or maybe their fifth faith habit, or maybe just modifying some things that aren't working in their family. You can actually read the first chapter of the book and find out more on my website. So that would be the third link that I posted there. So that's the littleshootsdeeproots.com/littlehabitsbigfaith. So you can find out a lot more about the book there. I'm not going to talk about it forever here. You can, if you want, you can order a copy for your ministry. You can encourage families to buy the audiobook. I got to record the audiobook myself, which is very exciting. I talked a little slower and it didn't make any mistakes because they edited them all out. So if you think that I'm a relatively engaging reader, then you can encourage them to get the audiobook. Or if you're interested in a bulk order, if you're like, wow, I want to get one of these for every family in my church, I can point you to a way to get a pretty significant discount as long as you order by the end of July. So that is also on that page. Same page, littleshootsdeeproots.com/littlehabitsbigfaith. Oh, sorry, littleshootsdeeproots.com, can't read, /littlehabitsbigfaith. If you go to the bottom, there are some church resources there. And the first chapter for free is there, as well as the information about the bulk order. And the bulk order is for Americans. I have to figure out something different for my fellow Canadians. The other thing that I have is a 6-week video-based course on developing tiny faith habits in the home. So if you want something that walks families through this in kind of a step-by-step way, it's basically like a small group curriculum that you could give to your existing small groups, or you could create a 6-week thing. I did this actually in a single day in several different churches. We did it on a Saturday, and then we just kind of walk through this content. But the video-based course that I've created is kind of a plug and play with families in your church, and has discussion guides and everything that you need. And it dovetails pretty well with the book, so you could use them together. You don't need both. You could use them separately. If you wanted to have both, you can. If you decide to order a copy of the book, on that same website, the one about the Little Habits Big Faith website, you make sure you grab the pre-order bonus package, and inside is a massively discounted version of this class. So if you're like, oh, I'm interested in this 6-week class, all you got to do is order one copy of the book, and then you can access the link for the discounted version of it. So either way, at the bottom of that same book page, you'll find more info about the course and then the free sample lesson as well. So I'll give you a 1/6 of the course for free. So in summary, Family Discipleship 101, there we go. That's what it's called. In summary, growing deeply rooted children is simpler than we think, and parents don't have to know it all or do it all in order to have a front row seat to the process. We all just need to start little. I hope you can see that teaching families is more about the message than the method. Once your families truly believe that true engagement is a better goal than sitting still, small intentional faith moments are enough, and that Jesus can take their little and turn it into a lot, they'll be able to find the right methods that work with their unique families in their unique time of life. Mom and dads will begin to realize that family discipleship is more about who they know, God, than what they know. And they'll start leaning on God to help them confidently disciple their kids. You won't have to fuss about finding the perfect resources or spending a week creating stuff, because they'll be motivated to source them out on their own. And you'll be able to focus on the kids in your ministry who don't have Christian parents. So I hope this has helped you demystify family faith a little bit. I am happy to stay for questions. So if you want to ask them, I'm going to stop recording